Thank you for tuning in to Live the Grace Life podcast. Today's guest is Mr. Bruce Pittman, the Associate Pastor of Family at Byne Memorial Baptist Church.
Welcome to Live the Grace Life. My name is Corey Holman. I am your host. Today we have Bruce Pittman, an Associate Pastor of Families at Byne Memorial Baptist Church. He's also a John Maxwell speaker as well as a life development coach. And guess what? He just authored a new book called Coffee at Joe's. So help me welcome Bruce Pittman.
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate your invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Awesome. Well, let me tell you all, Pastor Bruce, he's also a pastor. I call him Pastor Bruce. He has made such an impact, I would say, even in the last 2 years. I think that was 2020. Mm-hmm. He provided a growth session using John Maxwell's book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I really enjoyed that session. We did it with a group of gentlemen and just kind of challenged each other through that John Maxwell teaching. And so, Bruce, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. I've been in ministry, vocational ministry for many years. And so the past few years, I've really focused more on individual personal growth, or I call it life development, because I think it's more than just people growing. I think there's a life that needs to develop in people. And so I've been focusing on helping people discover that life and then helping them grow that life through coaching, through writing, all kinds of avenues that I can look forward to investing in people.
So do you find that people struggle with having a growth plan, or?
I think they do. Yeah, I think I say most, I may be exaggerating, but I say many people probably don't have a plan to grow. It's nothing intentional. Mm-hmm. It just happens. Yeah. It either does, it doesn't happen, but there's no mindset or thoughtfulness about, how do I need to grow through my, whatever challenges they are.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's one thing that's probably lacking for a lot of people is a plan to grow.
Yeah, I like the word you said, intention, and being intentional about the growth.
Yeah. I don't think there is. I think I don't know that people even have time, because I'm thinking about, how do we stop and just take a plan or create a plan to grow? I don't know if we even have time many times to stop and plan that out, and so that's why, the time when the year changes, people have resolutions. Mm-hmm. I think that's their plan to grow is having this resolution to lose weight or start exercising or whatever the resolution is, but there's no plan for that to happen. It's more maybe of a dream or a hope, but we don't ever put anything into action because there's no intentional plan for that to happen.
Wow. So I think that's so important because a lot of times you say people do make resolutions. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, we hear the running joke that, they plan to go to the gym in January, gym membership skyrockets, and then they stop showing up for the second week.
It's where you get smacked in the face.
Yeah.
You get up every morning or whatever your plan is to do that, and then other things take precedent and you just forget all about it and move on with life as it is. And so I think there's some sense of that we just accept that this is the way my life is. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, we don't ever think about, how am I going to change that?
Yeah.
If I don't like the way my life is, mm-hmm. or what part of my life, I'm just kind of going to keep going with it and never stop to think, I can change that.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to keep happening to me, or I don't have to keep creating this situation where this is happening. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it is that we just become accepting instead of, no, I'm going to change that. And have the resolve or mindset to this can be different.
Yeah, and that things can be different. That's one of the things that, like you said, we will tend to settle for what we know, what we've been exposed to, not taking a moment to challenge ourselves and thinking, this could be different. Mm-hmm. My life could be different if I became more intentional about growing.
Right.
I'll say this. I tell you, one of the things that I like to say is that growth, it allows our ability to see. It gives us an ability to see beyond.
Yes.
In a sense that when we stay boxed in what we know, we're only limited to the knowledge of what we know.
Right.
But as we grow, we're able to see even that there's even more. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I tell you, I think part of that is our comfort zone living. We get comfortable with who we are and where we are. And so when we start challenging ourselves, like going to the gym, that's out of our comfort zone. But it's supposed to be. Yeah. Because that's what changes us, is when we get outside of our comfort zone. But it's so frightening. Yeah. It's painful sometimes, and it's unsettling. So I think that's why we're just willing to accept I am this person, because to go beyond that, man, that's very uncomfortable. Whether it's vocational or personal or financial, if I'm going to start living within my means, that gets uncomfortable, because I can't keep going and buying these expensive coffee or,
coffee. Not Starbucks.
No, you were supposed to mention that. Anyway. So I think that's where it gets really hard for people. Yeah. Is that we accept our life where it is, and then we really don't want to change when it comes down to becoming a different person.
Well, I think the thing is, it requires work.
Oh yeah.
And commitment.
Yeah.
That's the thing that, I tell you, I even struggle is just being committed to the process of growing.
Right.
And making, and then the other thing that you said too is that we already have busy schedules. We already have this, you got to do this, do that. Yeah. But you have to kind of insert into your daily life or your weekly plan to invest in yourself. Because otherwise you become depleted. It's like you're going, but you're not making a deposit.
Right. Yeah. And as a pastor, I realized that, like when I was preaching every week, I realized there was so much output I was giving and teaching and preparing, but I wasn't receiving enough. And so I had to be more intentional, to be more focused on, okay, what am I receiving this week? What am I listening to this week? Who's investing, what I'm reading or listening to a podcast or watching a video or something. I wasn't receiving enough because I was putting out so much. So you're exactly right on target. It's hard to focus on receiving and investing in yourself.
Yeah, and I think another thing too, when you talk about having a growth plan, I think especially with what you do with being a life development coach, I always say this, that every leader needs a mentor. Everybody needs a mentor.
Yeah.
And and that leader needs a mentor.
Yes.
So
somebody that's ahead of you, maybe that's gone before and can help you navigate some of the difficulties, for sure.
Yeah. And then it kind of keeps us accountable to growing.
Yeah.
Because I think, for instance, if we're not careful, we allow, again, like, even if you do, reach some level of success and you get to a certain point, and then you think, oh, well, I guess I arrived. I arrived to the city's standard. I guess you could say that, but
you never do that.
No, you don't.
You don't. Maybe more than you were. But man, there's so much more real estate ahead of you that you just haven't even tapped into yet.
Yes.
But again, we get there and we settle, and because it's easier.
It is easier.
And there are times you need to. There are times like, okay, I'm not pushing myself. I'm going to just kind of rest in this moment and take in this and embrace this. But then there comes a time like maybe you realize I got to move forward now. So that's always and I don't know, there's a thing that says, okay, bell rings and says, okay, now you got to move forward. But I think, at least for me, there have been those times I've discerned, like, okay, I need to move forward now. So
I like how you said that. Sometimes, because this podcast goes about leadership, business, and life, and a lot of times you think it's almost like we develop this hustle mentality in business, where it's like there's always something happening, right?
And that, right?
Oh, I do
very well, yeah.
But you do have to take, like you just said, a moment to rest, kind of just sit and settle in the moment of what's happening. And then, there is something like an alert system that says, oh, it's time to move forward.
Right.
A lot of times, truth be told, we're a little slow in that.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
And I want to ask you, I want to turn the podcast
Oh,
around. You know, can you discern, do you have like certain things that kind of tip you off, like I need to like move forward here?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, there are many things that in I guess if you talk about business, for instance, is that you can look and you kind of look at the landscape of what's happening, and you kind of have to evaluate, okay, what's working, what's not working, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that I do constantly. So it's like, then, you can settle in the moment of, okay, this level of, I guess, I don't like to say success, but this moment here is okay. We're doing okay with this. But if we're going to continuously improve, I got to make this adjustment. And then once I make this adjustment, improving this, it's like, okay, then I start going to the next place or going to the next level. But I think it's important to master the level.
Yes.
Yeah. Not just trying to go to the next thing, but master where we are.
Right.
And then it's like, because it's a stewardship principle.
Oh, yeah.
I know we're going to something else here, but
it's true. It's very true. And so what you said, though, I think is important for people is, what was it you said? That how am I doing this part of my life?
Yeah.
Like in your business, how are we doing this part of the business?
Yeah.
I think that's a life question. Like, how am I doing this part of my life?
Yeah.
At some point you evaluate your finances, you evaluate your relationships, you evaluate like your marriage and your parenting and all those aspects of life. You stop and say, how am I doing in this area? And like that's kind of that tip that's, oh, wait a minute, I'm not doing well, with my relationship with my daughter and my son. And so, evaluate where you are in those areas. And I think it's time you need, I think that's where you stop and evaluate. I'm not doing well. Specifically, I'm not communicating well with my child. Okay, so what am I going to do to improve that? Will we keep communicating like this? Or are we going to start asking better questions, listening more, whatever the challenge may be?
Yeah. And I think that's a good question though. Like, what is that alert system? What causes you to want to move forward in, like you said, relationships? I think being married, I think for me is, I know this does not have to do with marriage, but I do want to kind of use this as an example, is that there are moments when you realize that, okay, maybe we're not communicating. We're kind of, you can butt heads on certain things. And it's like, where did this start? Why is this happening?
Right.
And so that's a part of evaluating, okay, well, maybe we need to take time to go do this or take time to go here. Let's leave life for a second. Take a pause. Rest.
There you go. That's it. There you go.
And then we spend and we reconnect.
Right.
I'll say this, when we first got married, there was this older couple, they've been married like 50 years, and they said to us, just get in the car and go. Like, when you get there, you don't worry about where you're going. But, and for those who are planners, are like, no, that's not going to work. But the point is making time to grow in your relationship, to grow in your life. Yeah. So bringing it back to, yes, you're busy. Yes, you have all these other things, but you have to commit to the process that, if it's a marriage, if it's business, if it's just, life, personal life, personal growth, we have to make a commitment to it.
Yeah, and as we're talking, I keep thinking about like stay-at-home moms and dads. And because you think, well, they're just staying home, well, they do it. But I just know my own life was so busy as a stay-at-home mom. And so it's important that even folks that may think they're not in a career or they're not pushing any vocation or their business, it still is important for even people that seem like they're not doing anything, as others may judge them for that. Like, no, they're doing so much you don't know. But for even people that are busy, and we say this, if you're too busy to grow, then you're too busy. And so I think wherever you are in life, whether you're a stay-at-home parent, or if you're pushing a business or an entrepreneur, that, man, if you're not taking the time to intentionally invest in yourself, then you're really missing opportunities that may be out there. You're just missing them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very important part of a person's life, all aspects of it.
Yeah.
To invest in yourself.
So let me ask you this, where did this begin for you? Where did the desire to become a life development coach, John Maxwell speaker, where did that desire come from?
Well, for several years, I out of nowhere, I'd have young guys call me or text me and say, "Hey, I want to ask you about this." And one guy in particular, he was in college, and he wanted to just read through the Bible with me. And so we would take time, we'd read, we started in the New Testament, I think we did, and he would just read, and then we'd meet once a week and talk about what he read. I didn't teach him, we just talked. Yeah. And he'd ask me questions about stuff like that. So he was just one example of several guys that I had the chance. I didn't go looking for it, they came to me. Yeah. And then after doing that for several years, a friend who had done some coaching, business coaching, came to me and said, "Man, I think you do great as a coach. I'm looking into doing that more." And I was still pastoring at the time. Yeah. And so from that conversation, I just started doing that. He and I did some coaching together, and I enjoyed it. Just embraced that opportunity to invest in people. And that just kind of started growing from there. And then Maxwell, I learned about John Maxwell's coaching. And so I started doing that and went through the process, and that's kind of where it all started. Yeah. And it's been growing kind of continuing to grow in me ever since. Yeah.
And I'm a witness to his life development program. I really enjoyed it.
That's cool.
Like I said in the beginning, he did the session with 15 invaluable laws of growth. And I'll tell you this, it challenged me to look at the areas in my life and say, do I really have a growth strategy? And I mean, like, when you go and you look, not just business, not just, your marriage, but every area of your life, do I have a plan for it? And that's what, doing in that session, and it was, I guess you could say, like a cohort type of group. Yeah. And it really challenged me. And then listening to other people, that were in Pastor Bruce's group, listening to them and where they are in life is like, oh, I can relate. Right. Because when you're transparent, you can really connect with people. Right. And it's like, wow, like they're in the same place, or they're dealing with this. And I think that is one of the best things, because sometimes we think in our little circle, in our own little life, we're the only ones dealing with this particular area. Right. Man, I should be growing in this, or I should be becoming better in this. Yeah. So
I found that to be incredibly important, and I wonder sometimes, and you don't have to answer this, but I think, would you say that was probably part of the major attractiveness was not just the material, but it was the group, the guys that were in the group?
I think so. It was both. It was both. It was the balance of both. Because I've always been a John Maxwell fan.
Yeah, sure.
So I have some of his books, and anytime John Maxwell is involved, you can expect me to be there.
Right.
Yeah. I had an opportunity to actually be in the room and hear him speak, and I mean, it just captivated me. Like, oh yeah. And there's just certain things that to this day that just won't ever leave me. The things that he spoke in that particular session, but even with, like I said, this growth, the 15 invaluable laws of growth. I think the other thing that helped was the accountability. Yeah. Because when you're in a group, then it holds you accountable to what you're saying on in the class, or for instance, in your Zoom class. Like, we said we want to do this. Right. Where are we? Right. Where's the results?
Yeah. And that's part of the intentional part, is that the accountability. And it may be one of the keys to having an intentional plan is someone else to come alongside you, that you're going to hold each other accountable, or 2 or 3 people. And I think that's, you gotta do the work, because Corey's going to expect me to have an answer for a question, or to ask him questions. I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense when you got someone else that's involved.
Yeah.
Now you don't grow by yourself.
You don't.
I mean, you can read books and all that good stuff, but man, when it comes down to growing, it's in the interaction with people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the growth really, the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Where the growth really begins to happen.
And I love this too. I'm just going to go here for a quick second, because this is a Christian organization and you're a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
It's a form of discipleship too.
Yes.
And that's where it really just kind of downloads into our mind, like it starts to hit, because we're in the room and then you're getting to hear other perspectives of, wow, I could be growing in this area, and you're 40, like this said, this gentleman's 40 years old, or this gentleman's 30 years old, or 50 years old, and you're like, wow. So it's not like you're out of place, you get to see.
And the perspectives are always interesting. I remember a lot of different groups I've done before to hear one person read the same chapter and get a totally different perspective on it. It's like, people, I can see in the faces, people like, I never thought about that. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
All right, so you just wrote a book called Coffee at Joe's.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Okay. So Coffee at Joe's it's not your normal growth type book. It's a fictional story of two guys. One of them is struggling he's unemployed. I can give you a little plot here. He's unemployed and he's struggling not just to find a job, but in the unemployment season, he finds out he's struggling with who he is. And so a lot of things begin to surface in his life through this crisis, I'll call it, of him looking for a job, can't find anything different than the season we're in now, where there are jobs galore. He's finding opportunities, but he knows that's not him. And so he's talking about purpose. He's talking about why he's here. He's talking about his own value of why he even matters. Some big life questions surface in this season of his life. And he has a friend, like we talked about accountability, someone to talk to about these things, someone to sort of mentor and coach him through some of this. It deals with his wife, his relationship with her. I mean, so many things surface through all this story. And I think sometimes the principles that we're looking for, or that we may not be looking for in a story like that, they surface easier. Instead of just saying point blank, blah, blah, blah. It's point blank, like no, and it kind of hits you, and you're not like trying to fight it off. You just read the story, like, So I think a lot of people can identify with our character. Emmett is his name, and where he is, and try to get through all that.
So when we were talking, you were telling me a little bit about the book, and really, it's challenging our thinking, challenging.
Yes.
Our thought process.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing, is that what Emmett discovers is that the reason he is where he is because of the way he thinks. And so he's learning to think differently in order to go to a different place in the future. Wow. And so, and that's part of one of the reasons I actually wrote the book differently. And I had some people look at it and they all said it was great, the principles were good. But I got to thinking about that. And so I actually went and rewrote the book and wrote it as a narrative as opposed to a nonfiction type book. So I'm actually reading two books on the same topic, but it's just a different take on it.
Okay.
And so, anyway, I'm not sure where I'm going with all that.
I was going to ask us, okay, is there another book coming after that?
No, because I think this is so much better.
Yeah.
It reads better. People connect with him, and maybe not necessarily with unemployment, but the way he's thinking. And like, I need to change the way I think, because that's the thing. The story is, if you want, choose the way you think, and you choose the way you live. You choose your future by choosing your thoughts. But I don't know that we even realize that. That as we're going through life, we just have this mindset and never realizing, like questioning. One of the principles in realizing he can judge or question his own thoughts. And so he stopped like, I'm thinking that, but is that true? And like, no, that's not true. Why am I thinking that? And even the self-valuing thoughts we have. I was talking to someone recently, they made a mistake or did something, and they said, that was so stupid.
Yeah.
And I said, hang on. I said, now, would you say that to somebody else? And they're like, well, no. I said, well, then don't say it to yourself. Mm-hmm. But we do. We say, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I was, whatever. We devalue ourselves, and would never say that to somebody else.
Exactly.
And so, but we think that, and we just say it without thinking, never realizing that's not true. Yeah. So that's kind of the overall gist of the story is, control or choose your thoughts, you choose your future.
Yeah. I think that's so important because one of the things that you used, two things you said, but one of them was our self-talk and how important it is to evaluate the conversations we're having in our head.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I think, I don't know if it was John Maxwell, but it was a few years back, that understanding just came like, my life is where it's at because of how I think.
Yes.
Like my thoughts are determining where I am in life.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And then how I respond to things in life and my thought process in all that I'm going through determines how I come out of the circumstances and the situations that I'm in.
Absolutely.
That self-talk is important.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
So we just kind of talked about self-talk and how important it is to make sure we're evaluating our thought process.
Yes.
So I guess if you're talking about coffee at Joe's, and thought processes that we have and evaluating, what would you say, like you said, Emmett, self-talk, does it improve or?
It does, yeah, because what he learns as he engages in conversation with his friend is that, hey, I am, like you said, I am where I am because of the way I think. And so if I'm going to be at a different place, then I got to think a different way.
Yeah.
And so he learns, intentionally engage. Why am I thinking this? And you question the thinking, and then begin to create better thoughts.
Yeah.
And one of the things he learns to do is to meditate, to gain because that's where you choose your thoughts and you take time to quiet everything around you, and you focus on this one thought. It doesn't have to be a whole myriad of thoughts, but it has to be I'm going to focus on one thing that's true, regardless of my circumstances. I call it the truest thought.
Yeah.
That's the terminology I use. What's the truest thought in that regardless of where you are and no matter what's going on, that this is true. And so one of the things he learns and that he begins to think about is that he starts with the phrase, I'm going to give this away.
Don't give too much.
I know. But he begins with the thought I'm enough.
Yeah.
And because in his thinking, he has not been enough. So he's had to try and prove himself and to do things and to achieve things because he didn't never know that he was enough. Yeah. And of course, we all know we're not enough. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have flaws. We feel we're not sufficient in any stretch of the imagination to be perfect. But we can push that too far and think, I'm not enough for anything. So I've got to prove, I've got to do better, I got to do better than you, I've got to compete. Yeah. And that's a whole killer, I think, of a person's value of themselves and what they offer and what they bring. So he learns that. And so then he learned, one of the things he learns is about purpose. Why am I here? The whole idea. And so as he begins to think differently, he begins to evaluate his own life better.
There's a thought, I think John Maxwell, and I think it was in the class that we did, it said, experience is not the best teacher. Evaluate experience is.
So true.
And I think that goes so perfectly with what you just said, is learning to evaluate our experiences and not letting the experience say, oh, we're not enough, or that, this happened because I did this, or happened because I'm not good enough in this area. Yeah. And just having that balanced way of thinking. And just balance. Because I tell you this, there was a gentleman that was in our house and we were mentoring him, and he just had this moment where he was just like, I just can't control my thoughts. I get frustrated, I get mad, and I kind of said to him, I said, you don't have to think that way. Yeah. And he kind of sat there and he was just like, wow.
Yeah.
It was almost like he had freedom to choose.
Yeah.
And his thought process that I don't have to think that way.
Right. Right.
And I think, with this book, I think that's really going to challenge people to say, I don't have to keep thinking that I'm not enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to think that I'm not capable of doing a certain task.
Right.
I am enough.
Yeah. And I'll tell you where some of this began was with me several years ago. I was in a situation, and it was just, in my mind, it was just killing me, spiritually. Well, I'll say emotionally and spiritually, I guess that whole same area. And I realized that, like, why? And I was just beating myself up over that, I'll say performance. I don't know if there's a better word for that. I just can't think of it right now. But that experience, maybe. And I was like, why not? I got to stop this. If I keep, and it would like haunt me. That's, literally, it'd be like on my shoulders haunting me. And I'm thinking, I got to stop, because if I don't, this is going to destroy me. Yeah. And so that's where I started, like, am I thinking about this right? And that's kind of where the genesis of this whole idea for me personally started, because I'd never heard, read, investigated how our thinking controls our life until that hit me. And that again, crisis for me was what motivated me to begin in my own self-awareness of being more self-aware, and then being aware of what I'm thinking, and asking the question, is this thought, like you said, is it true? Is it right? And if it's not, then why am I thinking? Yeah. So that's kind of sort of the personal story behind Emmons' story.
And I think, we'll insert a little Bible into this. We know the scripture that says, think on these things that are lovely, things that are of a good report. Man. And that comes from scripture.
It's all over it. When you read the New Testament, you see it repeatedly in places like he said, take every thought captive to Christ. Yeah. And so you have this thought, and you have to either capture it, and value, judge it. Is it true? Is it noble? Is it good? That kind of thing. So
yeah. So I think this is really good, and just taking a moment to evaluate the way we think, and not just in our personal life, but in every area of our life. And I think, especially for those who are in business, who are starting, and I always say this, that when your first year of business is one of the most challenging, actually the first 3 years, but really the first year, because you're kind of evaluating, it's a whole new life experience. Right. And a lot of people go through depression.
Sure.
But I think a lot of times, if we be honest, depression is a circulation of the thought patterns that we're having.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Absolutely. And I'll kind of go a little bit different direction. Okay. Some of it is like ingrained thinking. That we've been taught to think a certain way as growing up. And so we had this, it's a subconscious thing. We don't know we're thinking it, but we are. Yeah. And that's a good thing. Like, we don't have to keep learning how to drive every time we crank the car. We just subconsciously drive and stay in our lane and pay attention and do all those things. But then there's some subconscious thoughts we have that's ingrained, and we have to overcome those. Yeah. Like some children are raised in a scarcity mindset. You're never going to have enough. People are raised in depression, and I'm not throwing rocks. That's just reality. Yeah. And so you have to grow up and think, what? There's going to be enough. There's going to be enough abundance, and learn to develop that thinking, and then you develop that mindset.
And I think, like you said, because how you grow up, it does determine the parameters of your thought process.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And a lot of times, especially if you are exposed to a lot of things, if you stay in your own little corner, if you never leave your city, or you never get out and see other things, the parameters of your thinking will be limited.
Yeah, so true. And so that's why I think this is important for parents, that you as parents, you are helping your kids to learn how to think. And that's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. So in whatever way you can help them to think about things, about themselves, about their situations, this is going to set them up for greater success if you're investing in that whole understanding of your own thinking. Because And this is what maybe one of the, I don't want to say regrets because I didn't know any better, but one of the things I passed along to my sons was this way of thinking, and it wasn't always good and great and serving them well. But now look back and think, wow, if I had known this when I was 20, 25, 30, this would have set them up for greater success as a man, as a young man, or as a man now. So it's one of those things you learn as you go.
Wow. I think that was powerful though. Like what you just said is, especially because we do pass our thoughts on to people. And especially for instance for you with your children. And you live and you learn. You grow. And that's a part of what we're talking about, growing. And because if we stay in this place of thinking, man, well, the way I think is just the way it is.
Right.
We'd be like, and there are some people that just have a very ingrained, like it's like stubborn thought process. I'm not changing the way I think about this. I am determined, and you're stubborn to stay a certain way instead of challenging. Wait, maybe I'm thinking about this wrong.
Right. Openness, man.
And I think that's a level of humility that we kind of all have to operate in.
Right. That's exactly right.
And just kind of realizing in our life, okay, maybe, I'm not right in this.
Yeah.
And that's just reality is, I think, just be like you said, being open-minded, open to yourself, open and evaluating your thoughts. Then you realize, okay, maybe the way I'm handling this relationship or maybe I'm handling life is not the best way.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe the reason it's happening is because of the way I think.
Yeah. And I think as married couples, like the reason we're in where we are because of the way we think. And the reason our kids are where they are, and that's because of the way we as parents are thinking. Of course, I'm not blaming everything a kid does on parents. Right? I don't want anybody to come away from this guilty and shameful unless you're responsible. Own that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's thinking is the foundation. It seems like everything we're involved in doing is so much, and I think we keep saying that. I don't know if you notice that or not. You and I are saying I so it's foundational. We don't even know it.
Yeah.
And for me, that was part of the revelation. Is it's my thinking, and that's got to change.
Yeah.
And that's part of the foundation for me of a person growing is engaging and being aware of their thinking. And evaluating it and learning to think better.
I think even like you said even with marriage, and I think even as if you're in leadership, when you're dealing with other people, so like for instance, when I got married with my wife, she grew up in another part of the world.
Okay.
I grew up in the South, she grew up in the North.
Yeah.
She got exposed to this way of lifestyle, I got exposed to this way of lifestyle.
Yeah.
So we're coming together.
Ooh, man. Yeah.
And so she's used to, I need a shopping mall like right down the street, And I'm like, I don't care to have a shopping mall. I could be in the country somewhere, And it's the reality of the marrying of two.
Yeah.
But even when you're leading people, you also have to challenge the way you think too.
Right.
Because everybody on your team has a certain way of operating, a certain way of thinking.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, sometimes we clash because we're not open-minded to thinking, okay, maybe the way I'm thinking about this isn't right.
Right.
And so I really want you all to get this book, Coffee at Joe's. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
And I want you to, if there was one question that you wish I asked, how would you have answered that?
I don't know. There's so much. And when it comes to our thinking and growing, we could keep talking. So I don't know that there is one question. There's just so much that can be covered. I think part of I would go back to the subconscious thing. It's just so, because we pass along stuff and pass around to people, we're so unaware of it. Just so unaware. And again, sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes we pass along good stuff. I don't want to be completely negative. But there's so much maybe times that we do pass along the negative or the stuff that's not helpful to people. And I would say maybe part of when I think about the negative is I discovered how we have a tendency to lean toward the negative. You know,
That's
general.
good.
I mean, we
That's
do.
good.
You know, we tend to see what's wrong with something. Like when I leave here, I'll think about the things I didn't say. And I'm like, oh, I should have
said that.
Yeah. We should have asked that. But that's I'm thinking the negative, not the great things that were brought out. And other people will say, man, that was, great conversation.
They didn't even see the difference.
They had no idea.
You made a mistake. No,
No, exactly. So I think the if we can learn to be aware of our negativity, and there have been studies shown, and I did this in some research that found out that when they asked people to name, the 5 emotions they think of first, 50% of them were negative emotions.
Wow.
30% were positive, like 20% were neutral or something. But it was like decidedly the emotions we tag first are the negative ones.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our human tendency. So just being aware of that, we see the negative side more than we do the positive. It's just, but we don't know that.
Yeah.
You're not aware of that.
So, okay, that's just a powerful, that's a whole other conversation.
It is.
And I love it. I would love to dive into it, but I'm going to ask this and then we're going to wrap up the podcast. So for those who purchased this copy of Coffee at Joe's, I'm going to ask this again. What is your desired outcome from the reader?
I want people to read that book, read that story, and come away with the realization that they can control their thoughts and choose their thoughts. And I'll say this with a caveat: there's some people that chemically they're ADHD and they're all over the place, and I get that. And there's some folks that have a tendency, depression is just part of who they are. There's something built in. I don't understand. I'm no psychologist. I don't understand all that. But I would say for the most part, I think people can control their thoughts and can choose their thoughts. And when they do, they can choose their future. I mean, it's just, that's the main thing. I'm not trying to push anything other than that one thought, that idea. Like when you control your thoughts, you can control your future.
Yeah. So Coffee at Joe's can be purchased at Amazon.com. You can see on the screen Coffee at Joe's by Bruce Pittman. And you can get it on Kindle too, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, it's on Kindle and paperback.
And paperback. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
This is Bruce Pittman. He is the pastor at Byne, John Maxwell speaker, life development coach, and the new author of Coffee at Joe's.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast.
I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too. I enjoy conversations like this.
I can tell.
And so we hope this blessed you today. Definitely join us on the next podcast. Remember, Live the Grace Life podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and this will be streamed Facebook Live. Thank you so much for joining us at Live the Grace Life.
Thank you for tuning in to Live the Grace Life podcast. This was brought to you by Grace Life Marketing.